Hi, everyone. Uh, Welcome to this webinar of the Global Thought Leadership Institute at APQC. My name is Bob Safian, and I will be your host for this session. I'm a longtime business journalist. I host a podcast called Rapid Response, and I'm joined by two terrific leaders to talk you through things, Anthony Marshall and Cindy Anderson, who together oversee IBM's Institute for Business Value and helped co-found the Global Thought Leadership Institute. They're on the board of advisors, and they are also co-authors of the new book, the ROI of Thought Leadership. So, Cindy, Anthony, thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Bob. Very good to be here with you.
Yeah. So, and so for everyone who's listening and watching, I'm going to ask them questions. We're going to talk through the idea of the return on investment of thought leadership. We are eager and open to taking your questions, so feel free to put them in the chat. And I'm supposed to also remind you at the end to please fill out the survey about your thoughts about the session. But let's jump in. Cindy, Anthony, I want to say that one day over lunch, the three of us were talking, and you guys told me that you were going to try to quantify the return on investment of thought leadership. And as I recall, my response was sort of like, "Good luck." You know, like because as a journalist, I've always believed that facts and insights are incredibly valuable, but proving it economically, and sort of specifically has been elusive. So I wanted to talk to you. You decided to kind of apply the practice of thought leadership to thought leadership itself to be able to solve this question. Can you explain how you thought about it?
Yeah, that's exactly what we did, Bob. We said, who better, and if not us, who is actually going to take this on? So we thought about how we would approach any business problem that our business leaders come to us with in the IBM Institute for Business Value, or anything else that we've done in our career, which is we look at doing research. We reach out to the people who are the users of our products and services, if it's what we're doing for IBM, or in this case, thought leadership, and we ask them what they think. And so I'll let Anthony get into the details of the survey because he and his team put that together. But we had been asked by our leadership actually to take a look at this, and we've heard, I think, from the beginnings of our careers, what is the value of thought leadership? Why do you do it? Why should I spend my money here instead of somewhere else? And we said, if we get asked that a lot, budget justification and all, we said, let's approach it as if it's any thought leadership problem. Let's do some research. Anthony, you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So I think, very simple approach. We basically asked executives, and over the course of several surveys, and this surveying was really done for our own benefit in the IBV, to demonstrate the value that we were creating. But it was of such import and so compelling that we really wanted to share it. But it was very simple. We simply asked executives, do you consume thought leadership? If so, do you make business decisions as a consequence of it? Do you make spending decisions as a consequence of it? And how much do you spend if you do? And it was really that simple. And from those key elements of fact, there's a very completely fact-based. It wasn't assumption-driven. It was fact-based. From these facts, we were able to extrapolate and calculate, what the ROI actually is for a thought leadership organization, for thought leadership investment.
I mean, the results of this research and the way it's described in the book is like statistically the magnitude of return for thought leadership was enormous. I think higher than I expected it to be. Was it higher than you guys expected it to be? What?
It was. That's people ask us, what was the biggest surprise? And honestly, the magnitude of the impact, I think, was one of the biggest surprises. And as Anthony mentioned, this is all completely based on data and what the users of thought leadership, the executives in organizations that are using it to make business decisions, told us. So it's, and it was double blind. Those of you who do research know that means we didn't know who was being surveyed and they didn't know who was doing the surveying. So there's no bias in the survey at all. And so it was looking at it from that perspective, it was an interesting exercise in figuring out what what these numbers were going to look like. And they were astounding. They were, in fact, the maximum when we looked at all of the data was much higher than the average that we're putting in, that's in the book, the 156%. And
156%. I just want to, I hadn't mentioned that number before, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone hears that 156% return. Like nothing gets that kind of return.
Yeah. In fact, we just did some research recently with for IBM on content supply chain, and the return that was coming through on that is something like ranges from maybe 45 to maybe in the 50s. And a typical marketing campaign is about 9% return based on the best data that we could find. So you're right, the magnitude is it's massive. It's almost unbelievable. Which is in fact why we ended up writing the book, because it was so we validated it so thoroughly that there was just no room for error. We're just very confident that this is a real number and that it can be used by any organization to justify a budget investment.
Well, that was the other thing. You did this calculation sort of industry wide, but you also set out a formula that any business could use to quantify its own ROI using the same kinds of data that you could gather internally. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And just something else I'd like to add, Bob, is that the numbers were so substantial. Cindy and I recognized immediately that we needed to be very conservative and cautious in the way that we interpreted it and what was around it. So, the elements of this tool that you just mentioned, there are various things. How much do you spend in creating the thought leadership? How much is your thought leadership organization, spending and resources? It's got, what the spend patterns are from executives. Can't change that, right? That's direct spend. That's what they're telling us. We have no permission to change it, and they're large numbers. But also things like, what is our penetration into the market? What is our impact on clients? What proportion of clients? And so we benchmarked all of those attributes very conservatively. And so, for example, we know from the data that 88% of executives consume thought leadership, but they tend to only consume thought leadership from 5 organizations. Now, those 5 organizations differ between executives. You're looking at your own client set. We assumed, all right, if you've got clients, then let's assume the clients actually consume your content. Otherwise, it's going to have no impact, right? But let's, 5 divided by, 100% divided by 5 is 20%. That's too optimistic. Let's halve that to 10%. Let's assume that you don't have 100% client penetration. Let's assume you only have 30% client penetration. Very, very conservative estimates. So when people actually use the tool that we create, which is almost like a workbook, they can plug in their own numbers. Inevitably, they'll be higher than the ones that we used, because if you think, I've got good relationships with my clients, got 100 clients or 50 clients, and my ability to communicate them is better than 30%. I think I can do 50% or 60% even. Or 100%, who knows? And if you put those numbers in, inevitably the ROI is going to go up. So we've been very, very, very cautious in the way that we've sort of interpreted. So this is really a low amount compared to the potential upside that investments in good thought leadership have.
I want to pause before we go deeper into this, because at the Global Thought Leadership Institute symposium that you had, there was a fair amount of discussion trying to clarify what we mean by thought leadership. And I probably should have started with that. So can you explain how you define what thought leadership is? I mean, I suspect the audience for this webinar, everyone has their answer, but I'd love to sort of just flesh that out so we know what landscape we're talking about.
Absolutely, Bob. The definition that we use of thought leadership in the book is that it's evidence-based, distinctive intelligence that gives leaders the insights that they need to make better business decisions and the inspiration to act. And the key components of that definition are really distinctive and evidence-based. And there are 5 parameters that we talk about in the book that really define quality thought leadership. One is quality, uniqueness, and reach, which are in total control of the producing entity, right? The producing organization. You can control the quality by the sources of data that you use. You can control the uniqueness by the perspectives that you offer, and you can control the reach by, as Anthony said, how many of your clients you get to. The other 2 elements are independence and trust. Those are less controllable, but very important in the production of quality thought leadership. And Anthony, do you want to talk about the impact of those?
Yeah, so the impact's dramatic, and so with independence and trust, we did in the book, the way that we approached the book. I don't know about you, Bob. When I watch things online or I read stuff and they promise to do something, and then you're sort of waiting, and then you get frustrated, you click off the video or whatever, right? We got right to the point right at the beginning. So we wanted to deliver on the book says ROI of Thought. In the first 3 chapters, we deliver the ROI of thought leadership. We show you how to calculate it, right, in the first section. But then we do in subsequent sort of sections, we talk more about we know the number. How do we grow it? What are the levers that you can pull in order to influence it? And so part of what we did was to do a sensitivity analysis to look, okay, what are the variables that you can sort of play with, and statistically, what impact will they have on this number that we put in there? And so the 2 of the most important variables were independence and trust, as Cindy indicated. And independence and trust are in the minds of the leaders, the consumers, of the people that read the stuff. Do they perceive that you are independent of a sale? If the thought leadership is really marketing collateral or sales, it's not thought leadership. And from your experience talking to all of the leaders that you talk to, if you try and sell them anything, they're going to instantly recognize and kick you out of the office, justifiably so. So the thought leadership has to be independent of what you're trying to achieve in doing it. Now, of course, readers of thought leadership know that you're not going to create the stuff unless there's a segue to what you do, whether it's consulting or technology or services or whatever it is, right? They know that that's part of the mix, but they want for them to invest the time, they have to believe that this is credible research and it's independent of what you're trying to do. And so this independence metrics, if they perceive that the thought leadership is actually independent of whatever you're trying to sell them, then the impact of that thought leadership, the propensity for them to spend as a consequence of reading the thought leadership is substantially higher. And we're talking orders of magnitude in excess of 100%. And then there's the other element of trust. Do they trust what you say? Do they believe the conclusions? Because similar to a double-blind survey, a lot of people on the call would be conducting research and you have to trust in the double blind. You have to trust that your vendors and partners are actually talking to the people that they say. Similar with the thought leadership, they've got to trust that your analysis is correct, surveying's good, analysis is robust, conclusions are logical. They've got to trust in that. And that's in their heads, but both of those levers have a profound impact on value created.
It's such a paradox in this, because on the one hand, your research is showing like this work gets people to act, right? They make business decisions, they spend money, based on it. But if in the work that you're doing, you're trying to get them to spend money, it doesn't work, right? Like it's got to be a sort of independent, and by being independent, they're more likely to actually act on it.
That's exactly right. It's the more thought leadership tries to sell, the less it actually is able to sell. So it's exactly a paradox.
And when you guys are looking at this and thinking about it in the research we've done, you mentioned a couple of times good thought leadership. Like, do you think about it as each like project and specific effort, or is it more about the portfolio than a single piece of content? Like, what do those things separate from each other? Can you have one piece of content from a thought leadership organization that is trusted, and another that's more of a sales brochure, or does it all have to hold together?
Yeah, two different kinds of content. So, a lot of people get confused about thought leadership and content marketing. So, they're related but different. Content market thought leadership is never going to have a direct connection to a sales pitch, a product pitch, a service approach. There may be a case study in a piece of thought leadership that demonstrates how a client might have used something, but it's never going to have a direct link to any kind of product or service. Content marketing will, and it should, right? So they're sort of two parts of a virtuous cycle of a marketing program. And in the book, we actually, because of the value that thought leadership delivers, we position it as the 8th P of marketing, right? Anybody who are marketers in the audience are going to be familiar with the 4 Ps, the 7 Ps of marketing, right? We talk about thought leadership as the platform for marketing, because it is that foundation on which the rest of the marketing program can be built, because it's independent, because it's trustworthy, because it's got high quality, and a uniqueness and reach, all of those things. So if you use your thought leadership as the foundation of a marketing program, and then build your content marketing around it that connects to your products and services, that's the sort of virtuous cycle from a content development perspective. And then around, the portfolio piece, it's both. What you said, it's the individual piece really needs to be of a quality. They're all, they're going to vary, obviously, based on topic and interest and time of year and, that kind of thing. But from a portfolio perspective, you do need to have a portfolio that's all of the things that we already talked about. That's interesting, that's got a unique point of view, that's based in data, and that carries on that independence and trust for your organization, because thought leadership essentially is a long-term loyalty building approach, right? It's not, nobody should invest in thought leadership thinking that their 156% return is going to happen after one piece of content, that goes out one time to one group in their audience. It just doesn't happen that way. It's a long-term approach and requires a long-term investment.
And when you guys work on this together, I mean, Cindy, I know you focus more on the sort of marketing and distribution end, and Anthony, you end up focusing more on sort of the research. And like, how much are you collaborating across those things with each other? In other words, thinking about the content because of the way it can be marketed, thinking about the marketing because of what the content has, like how important are those two pieces in amplifying the ROI and reaching the potential that your research is showing?
Well, I think, in putting this together, and remember that Cindy and I have been working together for about 5 years in our roles at the IBV. And so Cindy's focus is, as you described, and mine is as you described, but Cindy's got enormous expertise in the research, and hopefully I help her with the marketing, right? So
So those areas end up, you come together more.
Yeah, it's extremely complementary. And but also, Cindy and I have literally written stuff in addition to the book, extensively. A lot of the work that we do, the stuff that we publish, particularly the stuff that's sort of faster turnaround. We've just because of time pressures, we need to collaborate together and just sort of write stuff quickly, and it's got to achieve all the stuff you've just mentioned, whether it's the book or other things. Cindy, anything?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're like the quintessential yin and yang symbol, right? we're like one without the other would be pointless. But Anthony's right. I think you can't think about either of our roles in a vacuum, because if Anthony doesn't think about how the research is going to be presented and distributed and get to the end audience, then he doesn't have the right mindset to write the right questions and assess the right kind of perspectives. And if I don't think about what it is that, the audience is looking for and just how I'm going to get it out, then, kind of the same thing. So we're talking to each other all the time. And I think that's probably the key to our success.
I mean, I know you guys are being very nice about not tooting your own horns, but I know that in the research that you did, you looked at you said, Anthony, there are like 5 organizations that a thought leader will go to, and you guys looked at who those were, and the IBV is one of those in the top 3 of that, and I think part of that is because you don't have those silos between those groups, but there is an open collaboration, and obviously that wasn't necessarily the central part of your research, but I'm just curious in execution, and as you're trying to do this, how important you feel like it is that relationship is as smooth as it is between what you're doing and the trust that you each have with each other about it.
Well, trust drives efficiency, right? And so if you and then there's cadence of working. And so I'll talk about that in a second. But trust, as an economist, trust drives efficiency. And so if you trust your team, if you trust your collaborators, then you can work in shorthand, you can work very quickly. You are completely comfortable. You would know from your extensive experience as a journalist. You've got people, and you are editor-in-chief, people that don't touch my work. No, each period or comma, it's nothing like that with us. It's just sort of change. If you can improve it, change it, and you trust that it will be better. And Cindy and I have our own sort of things. I'm Cindy. I hope I'm not going to offend. I'm pretty good with a blank page.
I know what you're going to say.
I'm good with a blank page, and Cindy.
And I'm not.
And Cindy is really good at sort of building on that. And I don't just mean editing. I mean sometimes my blank page will come out as a totally different blank page. Right? It's just like it can be very different, but it sort of sparks off things. And you just develop a cadence of working with each other as well, right?
The other thing I would say about that is there are plenty of people, on this call and colleagues that we know who are in small thought leadership shops, and they're doing it all, right? They're doing the research, they're doing the analysis, they're doing the writing, they're doing the promotion. So they're serving all of these functions, and that's perfectly fine as well. And Anthony and I have done that in our careers, right? We've both been sort of sole proprietor person, that single shingle out there that's doing all of the roles that are required to build thought leadership. So to have a colleague that you can trust to the degree that Anthony and I trust each other is really nice, because it's almost as if we're, we get double the fun, double the volume, because there are 2 of us, but it's as if we're close enough that we're confident that each one would do it the way we would do it if we were doing it ourselves.
This is great. I do want to remind everyone listening that Cindy and Anthony are happy and eager to take your questions. So if you have any questions and want to put them into the chat, we will pass them along and address them. I was curious where you hope your work on this leads, like what you hope the impact of the book and this research going. I mean, you could have just kept it inside the Institute for Business Value at IBM, and so kept it to yourselves. And I know, Cindy, you worked on an effort that was similar about the value of project management when you were at the Project Management Institute, and maybe that can help put that perspective in.
Yeah, the reason we decided, a couple of things that we decided to write the book was because we were thinking about our younger selves, right? When we were doing all of the thought leadership on our own, number one, but fighting for every budget dollar that we ever earned, right? And always having somebody questioning why we were spending money there versus somewhere else. And thinking back, if we had this number, when we were starting our careers, or when we were building thought leadership programs from the ground up, it would have been so helpful, because it's completely justifiable based on how it was created. And it just gives the CFO or the CMO in your organization rationalization that they can hold on to say, if we invest in this thing called thought leadership, for the long term, we're really going to have something that's going to be valuable for our organization. We're going to be able to build our brand. We've got a platform on which we can build the rest of our marketing program. And we said, well, you're right. We could have kept the information to ourselves, and it would have been useful for us, in our own roles. But it's just going to be so much more useful for everybody out there who's doing thought leadership. And the better the thought leadership, the better we all get, right? It's a community, and it's a really tight community from what I've been able to tell in the, at the GTLI symposium, and just in conversations with others that do what we do. And we have to help each other.
So the questions have started to pop into the chat. So I'm gonna share a couple of them with you. The first one comes from Mickey Butts, and thank you for sharing your question. But Mickey asks, what did the sensitivity analysis show about the ROI on the investment in quality, great writing, editing, design, production, and so on?
Maybe I can grab on that one. So when we talked about consuming thought leadership with the executive, we talked about it, but then in the book, we decompose into 3 elements: quality, uniqueness, and reach. And these are the things that a producer of thought leadership can control. And so we actually have a framing approach in there, sort of a series of archetypes. If you're good at quality, and absolutely, if you don't have quality thought leadership, and by quality we mean, is it based in fact? Does it have data to support it? Is the analysis robust, etc.? Then you're not going to achieve the potential that you would otherwise do, or you could otherwise achieve. And then when we did the sensitivity analysis, we sort of looked at other variables that could positively or negatively impact it for a given level of quality. Right, because quality is something you control. The perception of independent, what your customer is thinking is something you can't immediately control, and so, but it's something you can certainly influence, and that's how we sort of approached it.
All right, here's a question maybe for you, Cindy, from Paul Lord, who asks whether can thought leadership be self-declared? Like, is there another way to describe or promote thought leadership in a way that's not perceived as self-serving?
That's a great question. I think so can it be self-declared? Well, I think if you look at LinkedIn, there's something like 340,000 people who have the word thought leader or thought leadership in their title or in their profile. So can it be self-declared? I think it most certainly is self-declared. Many people have declared themselves thought leaders. But I think if you look at the parameters that we've identified that contribute to the high ROI of thought leadership in the way that we define it in the book, you know, the quality, the uniqueness, the reach, and the way those three things play together in the archetypes Anthony mentioned, along with then, you know, the independence and the trust that are those kind of value multipliers, then it becomes a little less self-serving, because it's more justifiable, it's more independently justifiable, it's more trusted by the users of thought leadership and validated in that way, versus someone just declaring themselves as a thought leader because they're producing content and they have a point of view, right?
This is this question from Jonathan Duff, and he's asking sort of, in some way, I guess there's two parts of it. One is, you know, from doing the book, are there things that you do differently at the IBV now because of things you learned? And on the flip side, is there feedback you've gotten since the book came out that makes you think about things you might have done differently or would do in the next round of research or surveying around thought leadership, sort of where you would go next?
So in terms of, are we doing things differently now? I think with the IBV, we're constantly evolving, and the book, you know, these things take much longer to do than you think. And you know, the books, the origin of the book is probably 4 years now, and between, you know, if you think back 4 years ago and now, a thing happened halfway between that, and that is generative AI hit. And so we actually paused and did more surveying around generative AI so that we were able to incorporate an analysis and discussion of generative AI in the book. And so, you know, our approach to research is constantly evolving in the IBV, analytically, narratively, and, you know, constantly looking to innovate. You know, speed is of the essence, but quality is also of the essence. And so, yes, but continuously so. And then in terms of what we'd want to do different, I think we could go deeper in some of the areas. We've tried to cover broadly, you know, what you know, how to really succeed in doing thought leadership, how to capture part of the pie of these dollars. And I think, you know, the other thing that we did, Bob, is, you know, we aggregated very conservatively what the value is sort of economically, and in the United States it was 100 billion, globally it was 266 billion dollars, and that very conservative estimates. And so there's a big piece of the pie that you can always, you know, and we're sort of working through how to go more deeply into talking about how to capture a share of that.
I would,
go ahead,
Bob, can I add something to the one of the things I think that we may have done a little bit differently as a result of some of the research is with respect to understanding how executives use the various types of content. And many of you will have heard, you know, in your careers that PowerPoint is dead. Nobody uses PowerPoint. PowerPoint stinks. You know, it's terrible. Don't ever use it. Well, guess what? The executives in our survey told us that it was immensely valuable in understanding content and receiving, you know, the kind of insights that they expect from thought leadership. So, you know, I think we all sort of is like, oh, you know, you need video, you need all of that stuff, right? But don't get rid of your PowerPoint, because it's here to stay, and it's really valuable.
And those bite-sized like ways of distilling data as opposed to a long written report, that works for them.
Yeah. It's I think the key is to have multiple different ways that you produce your content, but, you know, put a soundbite on a slide. You never know. It could be really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of connects to, there were a couple of questions about the idea of sort of how to scale thought leadership, like how to, you know, how do you scale it? How do you think about marketing and distribution to reach the executives that, you know, that you ultimately want to consume your ROI? And do you guys have any suggestions about those things from your experience?
I would I'll just jump in. I would say the on distribution side, the easiest thing to do if you're in an organization, not if you're a single solo practitioner, but if you're in an organization, then activate your organization to distribute your thought leadership, because that's really the way that you're going to build those relationships and that loyalty, and use it as the foundation, as the platform. So for example, within, a big organization like IBM, we activate our consultants. We get input from them as SMEs, as part of the contribution to the research and to the reports, and then we use those same folks and their networks on the other side. So, getting them to post on LinkedIn, getting them to put it in their presentations, getting them to take it to their clients. So it's that sort of ripple approach, right? Your report is then in the center of the little ripple, and the more people you can get to talk about it, and so on and so on and so on, right? You just build a lot more reach when you have more people talking about it than if you're just posting on LinkedIn and trying to get it out on your own. So I would say that would be the first thing that I would do from a reach perspective. And then Anthony, do you want to talk about scale at all?
Yeah, I think scale is combining discipline with innovation, right? So you need the discipline you need analytical discipline, you need editorial discipline, you need engagement, you need discipline and all of that, but you also need to have the ability of a team innovating, right? And so having very strong frameworks, but within those frameworks, people are encouraged to innovate in the way that they do things, and and in whatever role they have. It's always really hard to get good people, right? And so this is where the technology comes in. Generative and other technologies that help people get rid of some of their tasks or handle them more efficiently, so that they can sort of cover more. Because as I mentioned earlier, doing more, doing things faster, doing things better, there's pressure on all of us, every organization, to do that. And these are the sort of the characteristics that help that.
So this is probably maybe a question for you, Anthony, but this is from Christine, actually, and she's asking, like, at a high level, can you describe how you calculated the ROI? Like, what cost did you assume? How did you measure value? Just at a high level, to recap that for us.
So I think the two things that Christina mentioned, the cost and the value, that were the easiest thing of all, right? So the cost, how much does it cost?
You just asked the people you're surveying with, what did you say?
Not the people. The people we were surveying were executives. They were consumers of thought leadership. So we looked at data and research and our personal networks. So how much approximately do you spend on thought leadership program? How much do you how do you define it? We had our own knowledge, and so we had our estimate of that we put in the book. People will vary dramatically, but that's why you've got a tool like a workbook in there, is to put your own cost reduction, whatever it is, from 100,000 or 100 million. I mean, I don't know. Some organizations would be on 100,000. There are certainly organizations out there that would be 100 million or more, right? So where in between that is the cost. The value was really easy, because we literally asked the executives, how much do you spend as a consequence of thought leadership? And so, we actually looked at direct and sort of indirect or influenced content, right? So the direct was very, very simple. In the United States, the average size of the organization that we surveyed was $29 billion in revenue, and an executive from that organization spent directly as a consequence of thought leadership $184 million every year. All right. How do we know? Because they told us. Okay. And that was the average. Then they said, but in addition to this direct spend, the thought leadership actually influences other spending that I do. And it actually influences, for a $29 billion organization, it influences 960 million. I mean, well, that's a lot of money, 960 million. Again, let's be really conservative. Let's say only 5% of that is realized. 5%, a very small number. I'm sure it's more, right? But was that very conservative 5% of that? Let's add together the direct, let's add together the influence, which is just 5% of what they said, and put it together. And that's what we'll say, that's the spend of a single organization. And then and it was a matter of sort of, well, how many organizations does a typical producer of thought leadership engage with? Well, they've got their client, and so we sort data on all of that stuff. But still, really the simplest thing was the cost, and the simplest thing was because we had survey data to support both.
And was there one of the folks is asking whether you saw any sort of measurable or key differences between executive type or industry or country? You mentioned the US. Any variations that are meaningful in those things?
So we, if you do any type of surveying, there is substantial variation between countries, right? And so organizations if you survey in India, which we did, organizations tend to be smaller on average in terms of revenue than organizations in the United States. And so we were able to calculate for India and indeed the other countries that we surveyed in, and in terms of usage of thought leadership, spend around thought leadership, and the size of organizations and other metrics, and also industry. We're able to do analysis by industry, and some industries spent a lot. As a consequence of thought leadership, some very little. All right. So in the education sector, very little, for example. But other organization, sort of other industries, I think if I recall correctly, automotive OEMs, pretty high, right? Automotive suppliers were really low. And so, there was a lot of variation in industry.
There are a couple of questions about the best way for someone sort of early in their career to get involved in the creation and development of thought leadership, or if you're a startup in early stages with respect to strategizing their thought leadership. Do you have any advice for folks that are at that stage?
Yeah, I would say for startups, it's kind of what we were talking about for sort of individuals in the small, really small organizations. Again, startups are in a really ideal position, honestly, to build a thought leadership program, because they have a full, blank sheet of paper to decide how they're going to approach their promotions, their marketing. So building thought leadership in from the beginning as the platform, as we identify in the book, is should be an easier path forward than sort of turning a ship and adding it afterward. And I would use the return. I would use the number and some of the other KPIs. And I think somebody asked if there are other KPIs in the book, and there are. I would use that as justification to say, look, you can spend your money in multiple kinds of places for marketing. But if you build a thought leadership competency and you start developing those trusted relationships with people that are your clients or your potential clients now, as you're a startup, then when you get much more mature as an organization, you've already got those relationships being built. You've already got the trusted, the perspective of trust that your prospects that you're going to be looking for from your prospects. So I would say that's an ideal time to build a marketing program that's based on thought leadership as the platform. As far as like a new kind of practitioner, I would say, get in touch with the thought leadership function, if there is one in the organization. If you want to be a thought leader, you have to do the things that we identify. You got to figure out how you're going to create quality. You've got to figure out how you're going to be unique. You've got to figure out how you're going to, attain reach, and then how you be independent and trusted. So if you're in an organization, you can work with the folks in your thought leadership organization to figure out how you can contribute. As I mentioned, we have SMEs all over the world that bring their perspective into our reports, and they're identified as contributors, and it's kind of a win-win.
I guess if you want to be a thought leader and be an expert in something, you have to actually be that expert and bring that, right? Like, I mean, that's which takes time to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And based on something. Yeah.
I'm looking at the clock, and I realize we're nearing to be out of time, because we're going to try to hold this to 45 minutes. I want to remind the folks in the who are listening to please fill out the survey, and actually they're going to do a little poll or a lottery. So 5 of you will get free copies of the book sent to you, the ROI of Thought Leadership. Cindy, Anthony, before we just roll out, do you guys have any final thoughts, the things that we didn't touch on, or things you want to close us out at?
So there was a question from Adriana just right at the end, Bob. And
yes.
Adriana is at a global law firm and is saying, basically any partner can shut down the content. And it's a really good question. And my philosophy is, if you're nervous about people throwing rocks at your glass house, then get them inside your glass house, right? And so if you've got particular people that are really problematic, then make them authors, co-authors, right? And then if you make them co-authors, they sort of become vested. And so it's particularly acute, I'm sure, in a partnership environment. But I think every organization sort of has certainly, we've had our challenges at times. But you sort of, if you bring people into the process and have them engaged and vested, then they're more likely to be agreeable to the outcome.
That is very sneaky of you, Anthony, but so smart, right? Like, why not make your adversaries into advocates by treating them like thought leaders?
Yep.
Yeah. Cindy, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, to your question, Bob, one of my favorite things to talk about when we talk about this book is, as we're trying to get it out there and, gain interest in thought leadership as that marketing platform, so that we don't have to fight these battles over and over, right? We had a editor from one of the pretty prominent business magazines say, I don't really think I want to cover thought leadership because it's so squishy. And Anthony and I sort of looked at each other and went, wait a minute, we have solid, justifiable, verifiable, validated numbers that quantify the return on investment for thought leadership. It's like the least squishy part of a marketing program at the moment. So I think, Bob, you've said, that we've de-squishified thought leadership from from it being that thing that people really couldn't justify. It's now incredibly justifiable, and not at all squishy. So that's where I would leave us today.
Well, this has been great. I always enjoy talking to the two of you and learning more about these things. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in and joining us, and to APQC for helping to pull this together for us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.